Welcome to Arise with Christ. We share stories and truths related to the temple. Together with you, our hope is to fortify faith in Jesus Christ and experience joy in covenant keeping.
Hello, I'm Carolee Bailey, and I'm here with Angelie Plojek.
Hi, everyone.
We're so glad that you're here to join us at Arise with Christ. We want to share with you this episode, which includes our guest, Mike Dunn.
Mike is a hardworking, fun, and loving father. He's also a rescuer by profession.
And Mike has himself been rescued from multiple life-threatening accidents throughout his life. These provided opportunities for him to experience the gift to be healed that he had been previously promised.
Mike Dunn was born and raised in Whittier, California. Following high school, he attended college in Utah for 1 year. He then moved to Washington State to work prior to serving a mission in the Nebraska Omaha Mission speaking Spanish. Mike was the handcart captain for the 1997 Sesquicentennial Wagon Train reenactment. He walked over 1,100 miles from winter quarters to the Salt Lake Valley. He found love on the trail when he met Lindsey. They have now been married for 26 years and have 4 children, McCall, McKinley, Spencer, and Ruby. They seek to center their family on Christ, service, and love. Mike owns Thrive Nursery and has been with the business for 13 years. He is also a battalion chief for Orem City Fire Department.
Mike, thanks for letting us be here in your home.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you and glad to go through the interview.
We want to ask you first, I think anybody who has talked to you knows that you have a special fondness for missionaries. Where does that come from?
I feel like I had a passion for it in my own life, and just from a youth up, really, I was always super fond of the missionaries that come back and speak Spanish. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, and I always wanted to. I had a lot of cousins that set a great example for me. Being the oldest in my family, I had to get ready for that myself. My family went through different activity and inactivity when I was growing up, so we kind of played the seesaw. So it was a little bit more challenging for me, but that's something that always stuck for me. And then when I decided to go, well, you know this about me, but I'm pretty much all in. And if I get into something, I'm going to do the best I can. And we know with missionary service, the only one that really judges that is the Lord. And so there's nothing I could do but just work as hard and as fast as I could. So I've always been passionate about it. Lindsey and I, all of our financial goals are built around serving missions. And it's all been about that, to get to it as quick as we can and as often as we can. But with the kids, love getting them out, having McCall serve. And it was interesting, her being the oldest and girls not being, commanded to go and serve. It was a different experience, how to coach girls into that role, if you will, without putting, unwanted or unnecessary pressure. But yeah, so it's just been passion for, McCall and I had a moment, she would even share it, where we were in an airport on a trip after she had been at school for a bit. And I kind of had her in a side moment. And I just told her how I felt about her serving and her potential of serving. And that was the first time she said it really clicked for her. And then obviously with getting her ready and getting out there was just an amazing experience for us. So, and with McKinley out there now too, we get the continual benefits. So
that's so great.
Yeah.
So you said once you decided to go, you were all in. How old were you when you decided to serve a mission?
So I was into my 19th, 20 year. So it wasn't an original plan for me, but I'd kind of finally, after a couple years out of high school, came to it. And so I didn't actually go out till I was 20, 21 almost. So I was delayed by, not leaving right at 19, but several experiences moved me into that. And it was full tilt, get ready and go out.
Now you had a particularly difficult circumstance that came up in your life that did delay your mission. Will you share that with us? What happened and how that came about?
So I probably get a little background for context, but the part that got me to the most difficult event was built on a couple of different miracles in my life. After graduating high school, I went up to Dixie College. Loved Dixie College. After my first year there in the spring, we had done a family trip to Meade. On the drive back, I was driving by myself. I was borrowing my uncle's car. I was super tired from the trip, 5 days, houseboating and everything. And I started getting sleepy. And so first miracle was I had, just before all the drop-offs, before Mesquite, I had fallen asleep and I drifted off the road and then corrected, did a spin out, rolled the car that I was in 5 times and landed in the median. And when I got out, I was able to open the door and get out. Every place in that car was flattened except for where I was sitting. And I didn't even have my seatbelt on. I'm pretty sure I didn't have my seatbelt on. And I got to the side of the road, ambulance picked me up. They took me to the hospital, but I was completely fine. Well, that single-handed miracle right there alone pushed me to, my family had me move up to Washington with some real good family friends of ours. And they took me in and I started working in potato and agriculture. Loved it. Worked there for a full year. I was perfectly content. And I was working for one of the church's potato farms, or church-owned farms up there. And I'd gone back up in the spring. My job at the time was to monitor the fields. It was 10,000 acres overall. So I had a little four-wheeler that had a probe on it. And I had to go out every morning and I would monitor the moisture content of each field. I didn't have a helmet and I just ride this four-wheeler all day. So one of the mornings I took off to go out shortly before Memorial Day weekend. I had been going out for my rounds and they had just taken the graders down the roads. So it was all fresh gravel and soft gravel. This is mainly a story told to me. I don't remember it. I'd been going around a turn and I lost control of the four-wheeler I was on. Well, it threw me and I landed on the back right side of my head and it caused immediate fractures and my four-wheeler had gone off in a ditch. You couldn't even see it. And I was lying on the road. As a result of that, I had 18 skull fractures, a base shoulder fracture, which is the bone that holds your brain in, which tore my right tympanic membrane. So I had a cerebral spinal fluid leak out my right ear. And that morning, the beginning of the overall miracle was my boss, who normally doesn't see me till late in the day, happened to be in the area and was driving around. And he related that he had immediately called for the EMS response out there, which is a farmer response because you're out in the sticks out there. So he said, when they got the ambulance there, they put me on the gurney and they gave me a blessing right then. And that's when I slipped into a coma. So I was in a coma for 6 days. On the 6th day, my home stake in California and the stake that I'd been living in now for over a year in Washington had a fast on the same day. And that's the day I woke up. So obviously it was a powerful testimony builder to me. I've always felt a kinship to Alma the Younger because I felt like that was my moment where the Lord kind of shook me and showed me his hand in his work.
Where you caught hold upon that thought of Jesus Christ.
And that's really, and the moment of like, I got to get my stuff together because I had just been perfectly content working. I wasn't doing anything wrong per se, but I wasn't doing anything to prepare myself to go on a mission. And as I came out of that and got healthy, more miracles came in this whole process. I knew it was where I was supposed to go because the doctors first, they were telling my mom, well, if he comes out of this coma, he likely will have speech problems, learning problems, will probably not be anything close to same at all. I said, even in that, he has so many skull fractures that it's going to take a year for the skull fractures to heal alone. Some of that was true as it came out. It took me 2 days to get my mental state to where it was normal. I had lost some close to 20 pounds of muscle in the coma. I had to learn how to walk again. Half of my face was numb, so I had to tape my eyelids shut, do all these speech pathology things. I had to relearn math, 6 months of just really intensive physical therapy to get strong enough. But that's where the miracles started to happen so they told me I was going to be a year before I'd be even cleared to potentially go on a mission. At 6 months after I was being evaluated at the USC Balance Disorders Clinic, and they had done some brain scans on me and on my skull, and all of my fractures had healed in that time. So I was 6 months ahead, which was a huge one for me.
Wow.
And then they released me at that point to submit papers and allowed me to put in my mission papers. So I literally got that clearance. And 2 months later, I was on a mission.
Wow.
So the whole thing of it and the blessings of the Lord in that was just phenomenal.
Wow. So how long were you healing in Washington State before you went down to California?
So I was only in the hospital and a rehab there for a couple of weeks. And then they went through a bunch of help with there was an advocate that was in place with the physical therapy and stuff like that. And they set up everything for down in my hometown so I could stay with my parents and do physical therapy in California, which turned out to be huge in itself because the USC Medical Center had this advanced balance disorder and clinic because of the blood leak I had in my right ear and the spinal fluid. It destroyed so much the inner part of my ear. My balance was terrible. So that's where I could get that treatment that I wasn't going to get up there in Washington. And then the hospital they ended up taking me to in Walla Walla happened to be one of the premier brain clinics in the whole state at the time, which was just, they didn't even know why they were going there and took me there. They could have gone either way. And so we ended up at the right place.
Do you have any ongoing ramifications from your accident?
I don't listen that well. No, I'm just kidding. Not technically, no. I've been known to have more headaches and stuff from it, but nothing to the extent where they thought I would. So I'll have migraines and stuff, but I don't think it's really, frankly, out of the norm of anybody else. I do have hearing loss in my right ear, but technically it was only 5% hearing loss at the time. So I was able to heal around all of it. The portion of my brain that died is actually the cognitive part. So it deals with everything you do, multitasking and stuff. And they were able to train me around that. So it was pretty intense on what I had to go through to relearn how to do that. I had to learn how to be able to drive vehicles and stuff like that. You don't realize it, but that's multitasking at its finest.
Sure.
And so I had to relearn all those functions, but none of it has been a problem since. So it's been a pretty big blessing.
Wow. I had no idea. And knowing and talking to you, you would never know that you had a traumatic brain injury.
Yeah. And thankfully with all the fractures that I'd had, I never had to have surgery on my skull. Wow. So that's where I have several scars from other war wounds, if you will, but that one could have been its worst. And I don't have a single scar from it. And they let that blood just keep going from my ear because that helped relieve a lot of the pressure that was on my brain from the swelling. But then there were so many fractures across it, my skull just expanded with the swelling. And it's the miracle in itself. I didn't have anything from that.
It is a miracle and a spiritual gift that you received, but also just that our bodies can heal from something like that is absolutely amazing.
So I got my patriarchal blessing right before I left on my mission. So I had my papers in. The stake patriarch used to be the stake president in our stake and had known me all through growing up. And when I was 2, I had another traumatic experience where I got ran over by a car and almost died. And in my blessing, he blessed me that I could have the gift of healing. And I remember chuckling in the blessing because it was one of the couple things that I took right from the blessing and always remembered. And I kind of laughed at myself and like, well, duh, I mean, we know all this already, we've been through it. But in all honesty though, too, like even in our married life, I've had a couple of significant accidents and every one of them, the doctor's like, well, you shouldn't be healed yet. So I started joking with my kids after the Marvel comics and stuff like that came out in print. I says, well, I'm just Wolverine because I just heal like that and you don't have to worry about it. But
wow.
Okay. So we have to ask about the car accident when you were 2. Can you tell us about that?
So when I was 2 years old, through another stroke of miracles, my parents had me before they were married. And long story, a little bit shorter, I had been adopted by another family. When my parents got married, my dad didn't know about me. And he went through the legal battle and everything. He won. California law at the time, both parents had to sign to approve an adoption. He never signed. So he won the judgment pretty handily. Mm-hmm. So I came back with my parents. I was 13 months old. And
so you had been with the adopted family for 13 months? For
13 months, yeah. I had literally gone from the hospital with this family that had me adopted. So I'd gotten back with them about 13 months. My sister was 6 weeks old. And my parents had a toddler and a 6-week-old and going to church. Mm-hmm. And so about 6 months after that, so I'm still new to the family circle and my parents are adjusting to not only one kid, but 2 kids. And we'd been down at my grandparents' house and my mom had us kids and my dad had left to go to a meeting. And at the time he drove a green Econo van of the 70s that were popular. And in Southern California, you didn't need 4-wheel drive. And I had wanted to go with my dad. So I had snuck out the screen door in the back and had followed out after him. He never saw me. And the van was a little bit higher up from viewpoint. And I had gotten stuck in the front tire and had got pushed under and it broke my arm, which has lots of scarring. I punctured 4 ribs, punctured my left lung, had a hemopneumo from a blood leaking into my lung, filling out my lung. Tore all the skin off my back. I have a pretty good scar on my back too. And then back then, this is like paramedics are just coming on scene technically in our nation's history right at this time in 76. 74 was the first documented paramedics in LA County. So, and my point is 911 wasn't as we know it right now.
Yeah.
So mom scooped me up and she said she hung on with dear life holding me while dad drove to the hospital and took me in. And I had probably a 1.5 years worth of surgeries to get my arm right and to get my body back in shape, if you will. So that was another one that was probably my closest call, honestly, even after all the head stuff. So,
wow.
My parents were together. My mom had gotten pregnant and her parents had shipped her away because back then you didn't deal with, you kind of hid
during the pregnancy.
Yeah, during the pregnancy. So she had gone and lived in Bellflower, a few cities away from where she had grown up. and went through the whole process, had me, put me up for adoption. In their mind at the time, it was the best thing that they could do. But I know now from my patriarchal blessing, I was promised to be raised in the gospel from the get-go. And once again, another thing from my patriarchal blessing where I said, I saw the events of my life, and in the patriarchal blessing, you see, this is why those things happened. And the hospital administrator had actually adopted me, who had not been able to have children. They were just moving to Louisiana. So I actually went straight from there to Louisiana. So when she came back home, moved back home after me, because back up a little bit, she hadn't moved away that long because I was mom's first pregnancy. So she never really showed until much later. So I think she had moved in with her grandma for about 4 or 5 months tops, not forever. So she moved back with her parents. And shortly after that, her and my dad started dating again, and against her parents' will. But one thing led to another. They had another accidental pregnancy. This time, my grandparents told them, you two need to get married. You obviously going to keep getting back together. So they got married, and shortly while later, my sister was born. My sister is almost a year young. We're short of a year by 10 days. So every year we tease each other because for 10 days we're the same age. But so they got married. And then when they got married, I think the story goes when they were getting ready to get married, mom had revealed to dad that she had actually been pregnant by him, and I was out there. And then that's when he immediately started legal action to get me back, because he wasn't going to have it.
Okay.
So to be honest, dad never really gave me a lot of his side of the story. Partly his generation too, I think, is more closed about those things. They're private matters. That's part of the reason we don't really talk about it that much, right? But it is something we are open about with our kids, because we want them to understand that, hey, people make mistakes and good things still happen. Good things still work out. So, but that was the neat thing. That was through my patriarchal blessing and how that made sense. It made sense to why I was supposed to get back with them, and seeing how the Lord worked on my parents to keep them active to get me to different points. So you think it's just about you, but it's really about a lot more than that.
There's a bigger picture there.
Much bigger.
Will you tell us a little bit about your childhood years following returning to your mom and dad?
Sure. So my parents had got me back. I had been there for a little bit. Well, then the accident had happened when I got ran over. So they'd gone through long struggles with that. But shortly after that, my parents ended up getting sealed before my brother that was 3 years younger than me was born. And once they got sealed, they had sealed my sister at that time to them of their sealing. But at the time, because of the legal nature of my coming back to being in their custody, I'm assuming it's the brethren in the church and the stake presidency and stuff probably had encouraged them not to have me sealed to them, because they were worried that there might be ramifications if there was appeals or things like that to the adoption. They didn't want to do it. So I actually had the experience of being sealed to my parents when I was a deacon. I think I was well beyond 12, but 13. My parents, part of the going in and out of activity, they obviously were active enough to get sealed and to have the other two. But then we went through a time where we were active enough to where I got baptized appropriately at the right age. But we had a tradition of going out to the river on the weekends. So we would, Saturday, Sunday, we would be boating, and we just weren't big churchgoers. And then about the time I was getting into the Aaronic priesthood, my grandpa had become bishop, my mom's dad. And my dad felt an importance. He believed in him and his testimony. So it brought my dad back, because my dad wanted to serve and help him with whatever he needed. And
so he was your bishop?
Yes. Yeah, he was my bishop. And so because of that, my dad had actually become the young men's president for a time when my grandpa was bishop. So we were a period of serious activity. And that's when my parents got ready to get me sealed, and they were temple going up until the time I was ready to go on my mission. So it was pretty unique. I mean, you don't often get that, but that was part of the gray area too, though, because my adoption wasn't even known at that time. I didn't even know. My mom didn't tell me about that history until it was the spring right before I graduated high school. So It had always been kind of the thing that she always said, I'll tell you when you're older. I'll tell you when you're older. Because there was never any pictures of me as a baby. And I was like, well, why aren't there any pictures of me? But I looked enough like all of them. There was never a question to me. So I was just like, I was okay with it. You'll tell me later. I just don't know. I guess in that deacon mind, it didn't really process like, wait a minute, everybody else was. But too generationally, I think back then too, we didn't like our kids right now understand so much more of the temple covenant than we ever did growing up.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great advance we have in the church, right? And how we're teaching the gospel. But back then it's just like, okay, I trust you. And I knew I had a testimony then. So that's what we did.
So you didn't put together that you were being sealed to them as a teenager because of
right.
Yeah.
It's completely, I don't know why I didn't put any of that together, but none of it.
Was that sealing experience a good experience? Do you remember?
Oh, very much. Yeah. I probably remember more of that, obviously, I guess, than my baptism. Like I have very faint memories of my baptism. I think a lot of my baptismal memories too are associated with the pictures of it, to be honest. But I remember my parents doing temple prep classes in our house and getting a bunch of people in the ward. It was really a big push to get people back to the temple and temple ready. And what they were doing for themselves had a large effect on others because they pulled everybody together. And so I have vivid memories of that. And then I was excited to go to the temple with them after that because I knew they had gotten ready to go and it was this important event. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually you did make it on a mission.
Got on a mission.
Yeah.
Yep.
So tell us about your mission.
So once again, this is another part where seeing how the whole thing worked, right? Had I not gone through what I had with the accident and just gone on a mission, maybe I wouldn't have ended up where I was. Because of my head injury, I was restricted to stateside and I had to be by a major medical facility. So if there was any complications, they were still nervous at the time. Nowadays, they probably would have waited another 6 months to have a full clean year. But that was the ramification. They said, if you can be by a major hospital, you can go and serve. So it took me to Nebraska, which I didn't care. I begged to go Spanish. When I read my call, it's like, you're serving in the Nebraska Omaha Mission and you will learn the discussions in Spanish. And I was completely confused reading that letter because I thought, well, does that mean I'm speaking Spanish or am I just, my cousin looked at me and was like, yeah, dummy, you're going to speak Spanish. That's exactly what it means. But Nebraska Omaha, you don't think of that. But then my experiences in Nebraska, I was in the Spanish program for a year and then I changed into English for the last half of my mission. Well, when I was serving in the offices, I got involved with the wagon train reenactment. That year had come out of Nauvoo into winter quarters. So winter quarters was our mission. And we had gotten involved with the missionaries in that process of them coming in as a missionary opportunity to explain to everybody what they were doing and why they were doing it. And then that same summer, we were preparing the Kaysville Tabernacle was being restored. And all our missionaries worked on the logs, hewing the logs and prepping the logs for the building.
Okay, yeah.
So then now fast forward to the end of my mission, I was working with one of the stake presidents I'd worked with. He was actually the president over the Wagon Train Association of 1997. So he and I were visiting I was literally in the last 4 months. And I said, well, how are things going with the wagon train stuff? And he said, oh, it's great, but we're trying to get a handcart captain. We don't have a handcart captain. I said, well, I'll do it. And he's like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm fully expecting my dad to tell me that because I hadn't called home for Christmas yet. This was just before Christmas. And back then we're only calling on Christmas and Mother's Day and that's it.
Yeah.
And I called home and my dad's like, he's like, no, you should totally do this. This is a once in a lifetime experience. I'm like, not what I expected from him. So I called up the stake president. He accepted my invitation and then he put it before the panel and the group had approved me to come back. And so I'd gone home in January and I went back in April to the start of the 1997 wagon train reenactment. And I walked every step from there to Salt Lake that summer. And that's where I met Lindsey and the rest is history. So,
yeah, that's so awesome. So the 1997 Sesquicentennial commemorating the 150 years from the time that the pioneers came to the Salt Lake Valley.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's super amazing.
It was very much a second mission. I mean, that whole process for me, at the time I was called to be the second counselor in the ecclesiastical presidency of the wagon train. So the brethren actually came out, Elder Holland and Elder Ballard, and then at the time, Elder Pinniger and Christensen of the 70 were in charge of the wagon train as far as the church's involvement and stuff. They wanted an ecclesiastical presidency out there. So they formed us as essentially like a branch presidency because of the membership out there, and we held sacrament services. So I was set apart in some wagon ruts in the middle of Guernsey, Nebraska by two apostles and two of the 70. And so it was a super cool experience for me. I mean, just off the mission, it didn't get better than that. And in the end, Elder Pinniger ended up marrying Lindsey and I in the temple. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was super fun. But it was an incredible second mission right there.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, how you and Lindsey met on the wagon train, how that came about.
Well, so part of the wagon train, the way the structure worked is there was a bunch of us that had signed up to do the whole thing, start to finish. Well, as schools started getting out, people could come out and walk for a day. They could pay to ride in wagons and ride with the wagons for a bit. By and large, a lot of people come out and pay to go with a walker group. So I had anywhere from 100, or maybe at the lowest I had was 50 or 60 people, but up to the largest, I had 1,000 people in my group once. We stretched out almost a mile from end to end. And Lindsey had came out with a running group at the time and some friends and stayed for a weekend. And to be honest, I thought Lindsey was 16. So she has always looked young and looked that way. But so I just didn't talk to her because I was a return missionary and I was way too old to be talking. And then her and a girlfriend, we didn't always have, but a lot of times we'd have these little Cracker Barrels or just kind of spiritual campfire nights, if you will. And we'd come around as a group. And then after we broke up from that, her and her girlfriend had approached me and just introduced themselves. And so we were just small talk. And I'm like, oh, where are you girls going to school? And they both went to BYU. And I said, BYU. And I just kind of silently did a yes. And then I'm like, okay, And so we just visited for a few minutes. But then the next couple of days, I spent more time around the area where Lindsey was walking.
Conveniently.
It was just perfectly timed. And then when she had gone home, she'd come out for like 4 or 5 days. She'd gone home for a week or two and then came back with some friends that wanted to come back and do it again. Stayed for a couple of weeks that time. And I never left her side. And Lindsey, with all the walking we've done, and she'd kill me for saying this, she has terrible feet. She gets just crazy blisters. I don't care what the shoe is. And so we just had a routine. We would walk all day. And then at night, I'd sit there and help her fix torn up toes and toenails. And that's just the way we dated. We dated stinky, dirty, in the dirt. But it was incredible because honestly, the time we spent together out there, we talked about everything. We knew everything about each other. You have it all day. There's nothing to do but talk. There was no cell phones. There was no iPads or anything to distract you. And she saw me through intense leadership experiences and also saw the side of me that obviously that cared about her and what was her well-being and others for that matter, right? And she saw me lose my cool. It happened, but she also saw me learn from it too and move on, so to speak. So we had one of the most unique by far dating experiences ever. She was out for a couple of weeks, went back because of work, and then came out and finished the rest of the trek with me. I think that time was another almost 3 weeks on the last time we came into the valley. And then about the time we were getting through East Canyon, I started realizing I had to get really serious if I was going to have a chance. And so I started talking to her about, us getting married and serious. Neither one of us could tell you exactly when I proposed because it was like we just decided we knew we were supposed to get married. And it was just a matter of fact event. A day after we arrived at This Is the Place State Park, I had taken her up there with the ring and we made it official. And 26 years later, we're still going.
That's an amazing story. How fun.
It's pretty cool.
So now transitioning to your life with Lindsey as a husband, we wanted to ask you a little bit about how your covenants help guide you and strengthen you and support you in that role as a husband and father.
Well, as you can see from the various angles of how my story comes about, it's all reiterated to me the importance of our temple covenants and what our eternal marriages mean and why they're here. I think because of my life experiences has solidified more the covenant in my life because I've seen both sides, albeit through different eyes every time. But I've also had incredible examples to me in that process of older cousins that went to the temple. The family that took care of me up in Washington, they're like second parents to me. They were always on the covenant path with their family. So I knew it was early ingrained to me to always have that eternal family. So it's just never been a question for me. And that's where our whole life has been. My kids, they hate it, but I always, whenever we're getting disagreements and stuff like that, my favorite thing is to tease them in a way. But I'm like, you guys are together for an eternity. We all are. We're sealed. That's what this means. And I really stress the length of eternity with them. But that's how I feel it is and what we are promised, right? And so that's where I'd really try to hit that home with our kids. I think essentially the covenant is alive and well in our home. And that's what helps everything we do. And frankly, it makes all the service and the different assignments and things like that easy.
I wanted to share this quote from Elder Bednar. This is from a recent Ensign article, but he said, "Our sacred responsibility is to develop holy habits that invite the Spirit of the Lord to be with us at all times. Habits such as honoring covenants, obeying the commandments, repenting, forgiving, searching the scriptures, serving, and worshiping at home, at church, and in the temple. And I just wanted to ask you how holy habits have been a blessing in your life.
We made it a goal early on. My mom worked quite a bit when I was growing up. She didn't necessarily have to, but that's what they chose, right? So it caused stresses that I know I never wanted to repeat. So after Lindsey got done teaching, when we started having the children, she's been able to stay home. Sometimes it was super tough and hard to do, but we've always been able to do that. Well, part of that too is Lindsey really takes the role of keeping our temple attendance up and keeping us focused in that, because a lot of times, and with my fire job too, right? Like I can work on average 130 hours a week of gone from the house, work time. It's just been a habit thing that we don't let it be a question. It's just kind of, this is what we do. And I think when you make the temple and going to church on Sunday, if you make it like just that's what we do, then there's really never a question like, do I want to go or do I not want to go? That's where it's really helped me, is her influence on how we do it. And it keeps it fresh in our home all the time. If it's just waiting on me, it'll get a little stale.
That good, better, best principle is such a blessing, and it makes life so much easier when you choose to say, like you said, we're going to do this. This is how it's going to be. And then everything else can fall into line.
Yeah.
But this has to be first.
Very
That's
much.
great.
So you alluded to your firefighter job. And sometimes a firefighter might be considered a rescuer.
Yeah. So can you just briefly tell us what your job is as a firefighter?
Yeah. So I'm a paramedic firefighter. So we do both paramedicine and full structure fire. And I've been doing that for 13 years now. Really, just to segue a little bit, I mean, that has been an awesome, rewarding job, because basically I've always felt like I get paid to do what I love to do, which is you get paid to help people and make a living off of helping people. And it's been a phenomenal career in my life.
So you've had a lot of rescuers from all of these experiences. The accidents that happened, you've had so many rescuers and people to help along the way. Did that have any influence in this career?
I don't know. I think it does. To me, it's like a dual-sided coin. It's like, well, it's ironic that I end up in a career that I was around a lot because of bad things, but yet those people have to have had an influence in why I found interest. Truthfully, I feel like mission life built me in a life of service, and that's where this even was more something that I wanted to do. My grandpa was a career firefighter, but he was retired just before I was born. I had the influence, but it was never something passionate from my dad. He was just a businessman. But dad also taught me about service. And so that's where firefighting just kind of uniquely takes over. I'll tell you though, in being a priesthood holder, and where in my traumatic event with my head injury where I had a blessing and was put in an ambulance, there's several times where I've given blessings. Randy Bell and I in our ward, we were on the same crew for about 3 years, and several times we had given blessings. When Spencer had his appendicitis, we were on duty that day, and I had gone to the hospital to meet Lindsey and Spencer, and I called Randy and he came down and we gave my son a blessing. And that's something pretty unique as your job, be able to give somebody a priesthood blessing and help them in a time when, you're at your worst. If you have firefighters come, we're not there because things are good usually. So
that's beautiful. And in thinking about our temple covenants, we have the opportunity to be saviors on Mount Zion. And I see that as both for our ancestors and those who have passed on, but also for living and for those within our sphere of influence here on earth. And so how have your temple covenants come into play? You mentioned you've given blessings, but how does that role as being a rescuer tie into your thoughts about the Savior and the covenants that you've made in the temple?
Well, I think the temple covenant, if we're looking at it as the grander scale, it's not just immediately about ourselves or our immediate family. It's about our Heavenly Father's family, which is all of us around us. So the more we keep our temple covenants, the more we're worthy priesthood holders, the more we can apply that priesthood when we need to in our job, specifically as firemen. And I feel like it's all just interconnected. When you have that understanding of our temple covenant, it allows you to do, I think, more what Jesus has taught us, obviously, to love one another. Well, the reality of that is when you understand that this world is the Lord's family and we're all connected, you can serve people with a compassion that's different. There's no bias. You're just there to help the person through what's probably one of their worst experiences ever.
Yeah. It makes me also think of your parenting. Mm-hmm. And I think of Alma the younger and also Enos, who had these profound experiences where they were, quote unquote, rescued mm-hmm. by remembering the words of their fathers. And I think of rescue in that capacity as well. Yeah. And within parenthood, and how I think you've mentioned when you were talking to McCall about the possibility of serving a mission, that mm-hmm. seems like you were just going about life and that came up and it was profound for her. Yeah. And how amazing that we have these opportunities as parents to have everyday interactions that can be so influential mm-hmm. and our children can recall. And I think that's our prayer as parents, is to have any sort of impact for good and rescue our children in that way. Do you mind just sharing a few thoughts about fatherhood?
Sure. One thing that I feel like I had a great example in my own father in growing up, and a lot of the things that I learned from him that I really appreciated, I've tried to pass on well, namely in serving, and a lot of the strong testimony I have about different aspects of the gospel and fasting that's affected my life, tithing, things like that, are things I've openly taught our kids. But I think the biggest thing is really just being open with our kids, open and honest, like that we don't always have all the answers, even though we might look to or pretend to be. It's okay to question even things that we talk about, but sometimes the rules are what the rule needs to be. Like you mentioned with McCall, here's a random moment in the airport. I think in our parenting role, sometimes, I don't know if it's society that we live in now too, it tells us not to pester or but if you don't say something you're thinking, if you don't say it, you can't be accused of not, you know what I mean? You have to get it out there. And half the time it's being willing to have that challenging conversation or the hard talks. And we try and do that. I remember years ago, we were struggling with McCall and a couple things. And the analogy I gave her, and I've since used it on all the kids, but I said, some of the rules that we have in the house, some of our rules are dumb rules. Some of them are dumb rules that I got from my parents. Some of the rules that we give you, you might not like the rule. And you might find you're using some of the dumb rules with your own kids. But the rules are the ones that we're trying to follow and use to the best of all of our family, not just this situation. I don't know why, and I'd love to hear her feedback on it, but it seemed to be enough where she realized like, oh, okay, as long as you guys understand that you're weird sometimes, I can be okay with your explanation. And I think you just have to be willing to be vulnerable with your kids if we want them to be vulnerable with us, right? If you can show them where you're learning as a parent, they can see that, oh, okay, you are kind of normal.
Yeah, that's great. And I think youth today especially appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's perfect. Thank you. Well, our final question for you is, how would you encourage someone to arise with Christ?
I would say we all have to find out what thing means the most to us. And by that, I mean, some of us are, I think, task-oriented, and even in our service and following Christ. And some of us are better, inspired from reading. And so as a daily reading, nowadays, I love getting the prompts from Declare My Word and some of the social media prompts of a lot of the brethren speaking. And that's been a huge reach for me, because I'll often scroll through Facebook like most of us will, or other avenues, and Declare My Word is out there. And that's a way that I can quickly get gospel interjected into my day. Lindsey has more time in the mornings after the kids get off that she has time to sit in a quiet environment and read. We just have to find the things that we can do daily to feel that connection and find more of it. Focus on it, if you will, but not also to put something in our path because we heard it's somebody else's idea, but it might not work for us. I love that Lindsey gets that time to study in her scriptures. I don't have an hour to do that in the mornings. I've got too many things going on before the sun comes up that I can't even, think to focus that way. But we all have the things. So find that thing that helps you stay close to Christ and connected to him, and use it every day.
We are grateful that you joined us today. We would love to hear your stories about how you arise with Jesus Christ. You can find us on Instagram at arise.with.christ or email us at arisewithchrist.temples@gmail.com.